And again, these are words you've heard before. I just want to make sure we're all using them correctly. All right, genetics is the study of. So genetics is the study of. What are we studying? We're studying inheritance, inheritable traits. These are traits that are expressed in an organism's genetic material. It's the instructions in the DNA. So the study of this is called genetics. Now we also use the word genome. The genome is the entire genetic complement of an organism. So this is all of the nucleic acid or the DNA in the organism is considered the genome. All right, the entire genetic complement. Now we're going to contrast that with the word gene. A gene is a specific sequence of the genome. So it's a specific sequence, and even more specifically, a specific sequence that's going to code for a protein. And proteins is what's doing the work. The genome, the DNA, is the instruction manual, but it's the actual protein that's doing the work. And I always kind of bring that to an analogy that we can kind of wrap our heads around better, and that is grandma's recipe book. Anybody got a grandma? Do you have a grandma with an old hard copy recipe book, or maybe it's a file folder or something, and it's got all of her recipes in it? And if your grandma's anything like mine, it's got great recipes. What's your favorites? Chocolate chip cookies. I don't know. She's got some. I got a big Southern grandma. We got some liver and onions. Never gonna make that one again. A lot of different recipes in there. The whole cookbook is the genome. The recipe is the gene. The recipe is the specific instructions on how to make chocolate chip cookies. That's the gene. The genome is the entire cookbook. And now my grandma's recipe book has recipes in it, but my grandma also has a grocery list from 1990 something. She's got some instructions for a blender that she no longer owns. She's got a half a recipe ripped out of a magazine, but it doesn't have the second half. A lot of that stuff is also in the recipe book. The genome contains the genes that's going to encode for a protein, but the genome also contains a lot of other things. Now, some of those are instructions to do something, like maybe you do need the instructions for the blender, because you still have it. So some of those are regulatory things. A shopping list may be considered a regulatory thing. What things do you need to buy in order to make Thanksgiving dinner or something? So they may still serve a purpose, but they're not a recipe. Okay, so a genome is the entire nucleic acid, all the DNA, and a gene is the specific sequence of DNA that's going to encode for a protein. All right, so I wanted to make sure we were on board with that. Okay, so microbial traits are heritable. And before we start talking about microorganisms, let me ask you, what are heritable traits for humans? What are things that you inherit? So take a minute and just think about all the things that you inherit from your mom, from your dad, from your grandparents, and write those down. Okay, so I hear students say a lot of things, and maybe you did too, about your height, your hair color, your eye color, that kind of thing. Some things that you did, the ability to roll your tongue. If you've taken a genetic class before, can't do it, don't work. But some people have those genes, so all of those are passed down. Those are definitely heritable characteristics. The next thing you may have talked about, you may not, depending on how hard you thought about this. Sometimes I get students talking about diseases that are passed down. So diabetes is heritable. A disease could be heritable. And what you're saying is that the ability to process sugar is not working for that. That starts talking about enzymes. Remember, enzymes control these metabolic pathways, and when an enzyme is not working right, then that metabolic pathway doesn't work right, and you can end up with a disease like diabetes, so the inability to process sugar because some of the enzymes aren't working correctly. So a lot of diseases can be genetic, and they are a reflection of things that happen when an enzyme isn't inherited properly. So enzymes are heritable characteristics from that. True. Now, if you really kept going, you may have said something. Did anybody talk about things like, what about development? How does my body know how to make a heart? How did the cell know to form together to form a heart and to pump and to do that? How did that happen? you have to have instructions for that. How did you get instructions on making your fingers? How did you get instructions? Some of you may have said, shapes of nose, but how did you get instructions on how to build a human, to build a body and a kidney and a liver and those types of things? So those have to be in the instruction manual too. So building structures. All of that are heritable characteristics. When we start talking about microbial genetics and inheritable characteristics, we get the same thing. So let's take that and what we know about genetics and then place it on microorganisms. All right, so things that are heritable. The cell morphology, which is your cell shape and cell arrangement. Is it and we talked about this in chapter 3, is it a coccus shape or is it a bacillus shape? This is the cell morphology. Morphology stands for the characteristics of. So when we're talking about cell morphology, we're talking about the characteristics of the cell. The cell shape, is it a coccus, is it bacillus? Is it arrangement? Is it streptococcus? Is it staphylococcus? How are those cells arranged? Those are heritable characteristics. So if a parent does that, if a parent is staphylococcus in shape and arrangement, all of its progeny are also going to be staphylococcus in shape and arrangement. Structures, remember I said like building a heart? Can that cell make a capsule? Can that cell make a flagella? Can it make an endospore, a cell wall? All of these are heritable characteristics of a microorganism. And then all of our biochemistry, our enzymes that create our metabolic pathways, what we can do with that. That is heritable. All right, so microbial traits that are heritable, and you can think about all of these types of things. This is a microorganism, and its DNA was processed, and instead of being packed tightly, it was spread out, and you can see it go out there. Microorganisms have one chromosome, which is different than humans. Humans have multiple chromosomes. How many chromosomes does a human have? Okay, we'll see how right you were on that. But a microorganism has one chromosome, and that chromosome is circular in shape. So our chromosomes are linear, these are circular, and you can see this is a map of a specific microorganism's chromosome, and you can see that the genes, which are like the recipes, the genes that are encoding for proteins are mapped on this chromosome, and we know where they are. All right, so if we were to talk about a prokaryotic chromosome, human chromosomes are linear. A bacterial chromosome is circular. Bacterial chromosomes, we said, have one chromosome. How many chromosomes does humans have? Hopefully you came up with the number 46. That's the number of chromosomes humans have. But you may have also come up with another number, and that's 23. And that's because we talk about chromosomes in humans as pairs. They're linear chromosomes and they occur in pairs. And so, yes, we have 46 individual chromosomes. Those 46 chromosomes are organized into 23 pairs. So I have copies of each one of these chromosomes. One of those copies comes from your mom. One of those copies comes from your dad. But it's the exact same chromosome. When I talk about mapping genes on that chromosome, that right here is a gene that influences eye color. On the analogous chromosome that you got from your dad, there's also a gene that influences eye color. Now that may be look a little different. The same gene may be slightly different, which your mom gave you blue eyes and your dad gave you the gene for brown eyes. That happens. But they are paired and they contain the same genes. There may be slight variations. Those are called alleles of the genes. So our chromosomes are organized into 23 pairs. When it's organized into pairs, do you know what the scientific word for that is? That is diploid. And we can contrast that with our bacterial chromosome that is organized, that is not in pairs. It just has a one chromosome and one copy of the gene, and that is a haploid chromosome. All right. So advantages. There are a lot of advantages in having a backup, a duplicate chromosome. So maybe it might not make a difference for eye color. If you got brown eyes or blue eyes, but say this is the gene for insulin, for sugar, processing sugar correctly, and one of your parents gave you a mutated gene, a gene where the instructions were changed and it no longer was able to make the functional enzyme needed to process sugar correctly. This could be a problem. right? If we don't process sugar, we can die. Now we have some backup plans, but still, this is a big problem. If an organism is diploid in nature, the other chromosome that is normal, not mutated, may be able to take care of it, may be able to get the job done, and it's perfectly fine. This case, we would have, we would call this a recessive mutation. This normal copy is able to do everything needed, and the other one doesn't show up. Now, sometimes you get a mutation where you don't have enough, and you may have some slight side effects from that because you've got one good copy and one bad copy. You don't process as well as a typical person with two good copies, but you can do enough to get by. And then you get some mild versions of diseases. You know how sometimes there's a really bad version of the disease and a milder version? Could be because you have one good copy and one bad copy, and so you get the milder version of that disease. All of that, so having two copies, being diploid, organized in that pairs, is a benefit for eukaryotic organisms. All right, so how come our bacteria, poor bacteria cell, they've been around a really long time. How come they haven't evolved to have this diploid structure? Well, generation time, right? Remember generation time in a bacteria? Quick ones can be as quick as 15 minutes. Generation time for a human, talking 25 years, right? It takes a long time and a lot of effort to get a human child from baby to out of my house and supporting themselves fully. I've put a lot of investment into that. And because of that, we only have, one child, two, three, maybe 4 or 5. You've got a big family, maybe 6 if you've got a really big family. Again, not very many. And compare that to bacteria. Every 15 minutes, they're replicating 1 to 2 to 2 to 4 to 4 to 8, 16, 32, 64. Oh my goodness. They make up for this, the negatives of not having a duplicate copy, just by sheer numbers. So say a mutation does happen, a spontaneous mutation, and you have one of the progeny of this bacteria cell is not capable of survival. It's got a million brothers and sisters who are. So they make up for this based on sheer numbers. Versus when we have a child where we invest in a lot and they have something wrong with them, it makes a bigger difference for that. Okay, so haploid versus diploid chromosome structure. Let me go back to the PowerPoint and see what I'm missing. All right, so main portion of DNA packaged into one chromosome in bacteria. They are haploid, which means they have a single copy, which means when they have a mutation, it doesn't work well, but because they have so many numbers, it kind of helps with that. Typical chromosome is circular, and then it's not in the nucleus, no nucleus, but we do refer to that as the nucleoid region. Wherever the DNA is in a bacteria cell, we refer to that as the nucleoid region. All right.